I decided I want to learn Hebrew, I used Danny Ben-Gigi's Hebrew-English Phonetic Bible. And that's what I did. So the first year I read the Torah Portion. It took like 10 to 20 hours a week to understand how to pronounce each verse and how to translate each verse. And at the end of that year, I knew I couldn't do that again. It was without encouragement. So we started a Hebrew class and did it again with the class. And then when Kellen was 6, I used the same thing. I would print out the individual pages of Danny's Hebrew-English Phonetic Bible. He would learn to read just the way I did, and I would test him, with just the Hebrew to see if he could read it and translate it. And about a year into it, Danny came to ESM, and I had been reading through, for the first time I'm reading through, and there was a fun thing at the end of chapter 2 and chapter 3. There's a pun there. You would never see it in English. I thought, this is going to be fun. And then, I got to chapter 22 of Genesis, and a story of... So I was reading 22 about God telling Abraham, take now your son, your only son, Isaac, the son you love. And in Hebrew, it's kach na, is what it says. Well, I'd seen na, maybe 5 or 6 times so far, and I thought it meant please. But here it's translated now, take now. And I'm thinking, no, it's not take now, that's take please. So I looked up all the English translations. All the English translations say, take now your son, your only. And I think, okay, well, what do I know? This is my first time through Hebrew, and I just forgot about it. So Danny came to ESM, and he said, like he said today, there's mistakes on every page of the Hebrew, of the English Bible. And he said, take, for example, Genesis chapter 22. That's not take now. That's take please. I'm like, what? And so that kind of cemented my love of learning Hebrew. And like Danny said, it's like the DNA. You might have mutations, but you can go to the DNA and find out what it really says. And so it's been great. And normally you can really make somebody nervous by having Danny show up because he's, Hebrew. But it's like Danny already knows all my strengths and weaknesses, and so it's like whatever, And so and also he wrote a letter for us to when we were trying to buy a home. We're not Jewish, so we couldn't just buy a home in Israel. We had to go through the Israel Land Authority, and Danny was one of 2 references I wrote. And after 4 months, they approved us. And I was telling somebody last Sukkot in Israel about this story, and she goes, "You got approved by the Israel Land Authority? Nobody gets approved." And and so anyway, thank you, Danny, for that letter. And yeah. So I asked Randy today, were you wondering when you saw this, how are these connected? Well, this song, Somewhere Over the Rainbow, it's voted the #1 song of the 20th century by the Recording Institute of America. And it was written for the movie Wizard of Oz, 1939 movie, but song probably written sometime 38, 39, by 2 Jewish men, Yip Harburg and Harold Arlen. Yip was a son of Russian Jewish immigrants, and Harlan was a cantor's son. His parents were from Lithuania. And they were writing about the desperation of the need for the Jewish people to have a home. And 1938 is when Kristallnacht happened, and that's when that song was being written. And then just 9 years later, there you have Israel, just 9 years later, from 1939 to 1948. And the dreams that you dare to dream really can come true. Are you familiar with the saying, Jesus saying that, Yeshua saying that the children of this world and their generation are wiser than the children of light? It's a kind of an obscure comment in Luke 16, and so I'm gonna use that to leverage into why I'm quoting this guy right now. He's a Christian. His name is Mike Gillette. He's a strong man. He does things like twist horseshoes and roll up frying pans. And he says it's really not about his muscles. It all begins in the mind. And if you want to accomplish something, he said, you don't do this thing like, I am wonderful, I'm handsome. You don't do that. These positive expressions, that doesn't work. He said, what you do is you decide what you want to do, and then you start living like you were that. You start doing like what you would be doing if you were that thing you want to be. And that's how you change, you become that thing. And for centuries, there was a desire of the Jewish people to have a homeland. For actually most of the last 1,000 years, then there's been this desire. And at Pesach every year, I'd say next year in Jerusalem, right? So for 2,000 years, this desire to have a homeland again. And we're going to see how that really accelerated in the last 1,000 years, in the last 200 years. And now here we are. And so you have to act like you have it, and then act the way that you would if you wanted that thing. Isaiah 66, verse 8. Before I do that, Ephesians 2. A lot of times in Christian talk, they say, well, that's for Jews. We're Christians, that's for Jews. And like 10 years ago, I posted on Facebook, Ephesians 2, verses 11 to 13, about how if we're born again and we're brought in through the Messiah, then it says, ye being in time past Gentiles in the flesh. So you were Gentiles, but now you're part of the olive tree, right? And I forgot about that. I posted on like Facebook 10 years ago. And then we're in Jerusalem for Passover this last spring, and we're waiting for somebody to show up. they were an hour late, and they brought all the food. And so we're trying to save them a parking space. And so there's 4 of us out there standing in this parking space. And one of them is this Jewish guy. They're all believers. And he says to me, they're all Israeli believers. And I said, yeah, well, as a Gentile. And he goes, and he just like right there, he just stops and he quotes Ephesians 2, 11 to 13, like, you are no longer a Gentile. You've come into the... And so when you hear that, that's for Jews. You hear that coming from the church, that's for Jews. Well, actually, if we're brought in by the Messiah, then it's actually for us, because we're grafted in, right? And I've been listening to some of Shirley's sermons. She likes to talk about how we're living in Sherry's sermons. Sorry, I keep calling you Shirley. Sherry's sermons, and she likes to talk about how we're living in such an exciting time, and really we are. And Sherry's mentioned Shlomo Riskin. Well, Shlomo Riskin has given his ministry over to Pesach Walicki and David Nekrutman, and it's kind of cool how in Israel all the names, Hebrew all the names mean something. Like here someone's name is John. They don't really know what John means, but in Israel, Pesach is Passover. Passover is his name. And he talked about something that's pretty significant. So Israel became a country in 1948. And Isaiah 66 says, who hath heard such a thing? Who hath seen such things? Shall the earth be made to bring forth in one day? Or shall a nation be born at once? For as soon as Zion travailed, she brought forth her children. And everyone thought that was like spiritual. Throughout the history of the Christian church, mostly, that's spiritual, that's not real, that's just spiritualized, because Israel can never become a country again. And like Mark Twain in the mid-1800s said, yeah, it's just a dream, it's never going to happen. It's a wasteland. And then, in one day, 1948, May 14th, 1948, Israel became a country again, fulfilling a 2,700-year-old prophecy. It took great courage, and when it came down to it, Ben-Gurion had to decide whether or not to call it a state, whether to declare it a state or not. And he was getting a lot of advice that if he did, they'd be immediately destroyed by the armies that were waiting to destroy them, including American authorities were saying, don't do it. And the question was, did they have a right to make a decision that might inflict a second catastrophe on the Jewish people? Right after the Holocaust, did he have the right to declare a state, which was then going to result in the destruction of the country? They had a 10-person board, and they were split 50-50. And according to Pesach Walicki, one of the things that changed their mind, or actually led to thinking that, no, we really need to do this, is this counting. Now, this is something that's been known for about 1,000, well, it's been talked about for about 1,000, almost 1,000 years. And Pesach talked about this about 6 years ago is when I first heard about it. So we're in the year 5783 right now, which means the Jewish year 5000 was in 1240. Okay, so 1240, Middle Ages, and there's a rabbi named Nachman. He's also called the Ramban, Nachmanides, and he went to Israel and found there were only 2 Jews living there in Jerusalem. And so it was like the lowest point in history of Jerusalem was about that time. In 1265, he wrote a letter to one of his sons saying, it's really bad right now, but we're in the beginning of redemption. Because, so here's the thing. The reason he was saying that is Psalm 90, verse 4 says, for 1,000 years in thy sight are but as yesterday when it is past and as a watch in the night. So there's been this idea that 1,000 years is like a day, right? So there's 6 days of creation, and then there's the 7th day, which is Shabbat. And so if you take those 6 days, that's 6,000 years, and then 1,000 year, we'd say now millennium, a reign of peace, right? So the 6th day is the day of preparation for Shabbat. That's, Erev Shabbat Friday, and that began in the year 5000, because from 0 to 1000 is the first year, and then you end up with the 6th day beginning with the year 5000 in 1240. Well, he wrote his letter to his son in 1265 while he's living in Jerusalem, and he said, we are in the beginning of the redemption. So this idea has been here for a long time. They know that this is now beginning the preparation for Shabbat. This is the year 6000 the beginning of the millennium. So now, the biblical day begins at night, and there was evening and there was morning. So you take 12 hours of night, and they have 12 hours of day. 12 hours of night, how long would that be in this, what we're talking about here? How many years would that be? 12 hours of night. 500, yeah. Half of 1,000, right? So 500 years from 1240 to 1740, night is over. And this was very, very well understood with people, that night is over. And this is what led to the beginning of the immigration in Israel in the late 1700s and 1800s, is that we're approaching that time, that this is the time where we need to prepare for Shabbat. And now if you take 1,000 years and you divide it by 24, so 1,000 years is a day, and a day has 24 hours. So you divide 1,000 by 24, you get, and by the way, Pesach did this whole thing just verbally, and I'm helping with the chart here. It makes it easier to follow, although he did a great job. So every hour is worth 41 2/3 years. And then there's an interesting thing. In the biblical description of the creation in chapter 1 of Genesis, you have Yom Revi'i, Yom Chamishi, which is translated in English as the 4th day, the 5th day, which is wrong because there's no the there. It's just Yom Revi'i. It's like day 4. Yom Chamishi, day 5. And then an anomaly, Yom Hashishi, the 6th day. So that's the only one that should be translated as the 6th day. So there's been a lot of speculation, and what's the significance of that? Hey, Yom HaShishi. And so hey, all the letters have numerical value. It's how like if you have a Hebrew Bible, you'll see they use the letters for counting the verses. And hey is 5. So the 5th hour of the day is also the time to begin preparation for the Shabbat. Like when, stores start closing down, people start going home, preparing for Shabbat. Well, if you take the 12 hours of night and add the 5 hours of the 5th hour of the day, you get 17 hours. And if you multiply 17 hours times 41 2/3 years per hour, you get 708 1/3. Anyone want to guess what year that is. Oh, I have my pen. Huh?
5708.
5708. Could be. I'm thinking our calendar years.
Oh, 2023.
Who said that? Okay. Hi. How far can I walk? Oh, all right. So if you start with the beginning of the 5,000 years, which was in the 5,000th year in AD 1240, and you add 708 years and a third, Tina got it? It's 1948. And not only that, but what time of year?
May.
What? Yeah, it's spring. Okay. All right. Good job, Tina.
Wow.
So that was one of the deciding factors when everyone was saying you're going to be destroyed. It's like, well, this is the time of preparation for Shabbat. So they went ahead and they declared a country. It looked like it was going to be lights out. Instead, they got more land. And so then, further down in Isaiah, he says in verse 12, so Isaiah 66 verse 8 says it will become a country in one day. Verse 12, for thus saith the Lord, behold, I will extend peace to Jerusalem like a river. It says to her, but it's talking about Jerusalem, like a river. So in these 4 verses, you have the creation of the state of Israel, and then God extending peace to her like a river. So we're kind of like in between those 2 verses right now. Okay, we have the state of Israel, and we don't really have like peace like a river yet. So we're in the middle there. Like this week has been a rough week. A friend of mine's got and in Jerusalem, he's got a Telegram channel called From Jerusalem, and eye-opening stuff has been going on, and he just posted a picture of taken through the bullet hole of a cafe where 4 people were murdered this week, and through the bullet hole in the window you can see Jewish people assembling with flags and prayer shawls and saying we're not gonna be defeated. And so there's a lot going on. So we're in this time, and the first time I went to Israel with my second son Nathaniel, we were told don't go because it was during the second Intifada, and the State Department was saying don't go to Israel. They weren't saying you can't, but they're saying you shouldn't. So many things were blowing up, and I actually had a panic attack. I'd never had one before, but my heart is pounding. I'm having trouble breathing. I'm like, why am I taking my 15-year-old into a war zone? And then we landed at Ben Gurion, and I felt this blanket of peace come on me, and just felt fine there the whole time. And so we have these 2 verses. It'll become a country one day, and peace to the river, and peace will flow to Jerusalem like a river. It's one time someone described prophetic vision as like looking at a mountain range. Like from here you can see the Olympics, and on a clear day it looks like this, these sharp outline of these mountains. You think, wow, it looks like it's about a half-mile deep. But if you were to go into those mountains, you find that there's these big valleys between them, and there's big long spaces between the mountains. And that's the way it is with prophetic vision. It looks like it's all like happening at the same time, but actually there's this big valley in between. That's what we have there. So Sherry has been talking about, there was the way that the camps go out, and then there was last week there was the order, and then there was the rebellion last week where people gave up, and this week is Korach. And so what does anybody know what Korach's name means? The guy who leads the rebellion, besides Danny? Huh? Well, the root is the root Korach is the same root as for frost, which is kerach, and it's also the root for the word of baldness. And so, Huh?
Ice.
Ice, yeah. And so, all right. So, think now in Deuteronomy 25:17 and 18, God's giving instruction to Moses, and he says, "Remember what Amalek did unto thee by the way, when ye were come forth out of Egypt, how he met thee by the way, and smote the hindmost of thee, even all that were feeble behind thee, when thou wast faint and weary, and he feared not God." By the way, I'm using the King James because I watched a video this last week where the guy used two verses, a bunch of verses, but two of them he used to disprove Torah, and from a Christian point of view, how this is all, the Torah people are all mixed up and stuff. And he used two verses which are mistranslated, just flat out mistranslated. But in the King James, they're not messed up. And in the King James, you see what's really being said. So I'm on a King James kick this week. And so it's a little hard. They say that you need an 8th grade education to understand the NIV and a 12th grade education to understand the King James. So I hope you're okay. And he feared not God. So that phrase, how he met thee by the way, is Asher Korach-Korah baderech. So how he met you by the way. That's what that means. Now, interesting thing about this is this is one of these things where it can actually mean something else. Usually, Hebrew's much more precise than English, but in this case, and there's some Jewish commentary on this, that it could also mean who chilled you, by the way. Kar is the word for cold. Who chilled you, by the way. And it's interesting because that's what terrorists do, is they... Remember, Amalek was attacking the weak at the end, and that's what terrorists, they tend to attack the weak and like make everybody else freeze with, and like unable to respond. So it could mean either or both. And that's what Korach is doing, is he's like, he comes with this rebellion and like, oh no, like what? And also there's the baldness, the idea of baldness. In Deuteronomy 14, verses 1 to 2, "Ye are the children of the Lord your God. Ye shall not cut yourselves or make any baldness between your eyes for the dead. For thou art a holy people unto the Lord thy God, and the Lord hath chosen thee to be a peculiar people unto himself above all the nations that are upon the earth." That peculiar people is Am Segula, treasured people. It's a cool phrase. So here you have Korach, that's his name, Korach. And here I have Korach-Korah, which is baldness. And so baldness is related to mourning. And why would there be mourning at this point? Why would there be mourning in the camp? Why would this thing of baldness and mourning be related to Korach? What's going on? Death. Yeah, the death is, they're all going to die. They found out last week, right? But our time they found out last week. But in Numbers 16, and this is the first verse of our Torah portion today, verse 1. "Now Korach, the son of Izhar, the son of Kohath, the son of Levi, and Dathan and Abiram, the sons of Eliab and On, the son of Peleth, the sons of Reuben, took men. And they rose up before Moses with certain of the children of Israel, 250 princes of the assembly, famous in the congregation, men of renown. And they gathered themselves together against Moses and against Aaron, and said unto them, Ye take too much upon you, seeing all the congregation are holy, every one of them, and the Lord is among them. Wherefore then lift ye up yourselves above the congregation of the Lord." So Korach is saying, we're all holy. No one has special powers. There are no special leaders. And then what's the next message that he's not saying? Where have we seen this? We've seen this repeated over and over in history. And there's a book by George Orwell called Animal Farm, where the pigs, they start this rebellion in the farm against the owners. And then one day the animals come out and they see scrawled on the barn wall, "All animals are created equal, but some animals are more equal than others," right? So the pigs take over. So the whole rebellion was so that the pigs could take over. They start walking on 2 feet, So Korach, that's the human thing. We're all holy. No one has special powers. There's no special leaders except me.
Okay. And then in verse 8 to 10 of Numbers 16, and Moses said unto Korach, Hear, I pray you, ye sons of Levi, seemeth it but a small thing unto you that the God of Israel hath separated you from the congregation of Israel, to bring you near to himself, to do the service of the tabernacle of the Lord, and to stand before the congregation to minister unto them. And he hath brought thee near to him, and all thy brethren, the sons of Levi, with thee, and seek ye the priesthood also. So Korach was a Levite, but only the sons of Aaron could actually go into the tabernacle. So the sons of Aaron, God had set them apart, made them special. And Korach, who's a regular Levi, is like, no, we want to do that. You know, we're special too, we're holy too, we want to do that. And then Moses calls Dathan and Abiram in 12 to 14. And Moses sent to call Dathan and Abiram, the sons of Eliab, which said, We will not come up. Is it a small thing that thou hast brought us up out of a land that floweth with milk and honey? So this is, you know, there's a passage in Ecclesiastes that says, there's madness in men's hearts while they live, and afterward they join the dead. And here they're talking about, Moses, you've brought us up out of a land of milk and honey. Where did they come from? You know, they were getting killed. They were like suffering, and but people get, and you see it like people do crazy stuff. They get crazy ideas, and then they die. And so we will not come up. We won't respond to your call. We won't go up to this land to talk about, and really, that's because we're going to die right here. That's, you know, last week they got that message. And that death decree from last week's Torah portion, Beishalach, in Numbers 14:29, your carcasses, God is talking to Moses, he says, your carcasses shall fall in this wilderness, and all that were numbered of you, according to your whole number, from 20 years old and upward, which have murmured against me. And then in verse 39, Moses told these sayings unto all the children of Israel, and the people mourned greatly. So they're in a period of mourning, they know they're going to die. There's 600,000 fighting men, an equal number of women of that age. It's like 1.2 million people. Over the next 38 years, they're all going to die. That's about 80 deaths per day. And they're not going to make it into the land, which was the whole point. They're just not going to. They're not going to do it. So we go into the 5 stages of grief. Have you heard that? 5 stages of grief. The first stage is denial, and that was when Moses told them, "You're going to die," and they said, "No, we're going to take the land. We're going to do it." And Moses said, "Don't. You're going to die if you do it." And they go, "No, we're going to take the land." And they went up and they got chased and beaten, and so that's denial. The next stage of grief is anger. And then we have the rebellion of Korach, blaming Moses, chilling the congregation, tearing the hair out in mourning, baldness. The third stage of grief is bargaining. Now, this is actually most of what's happening now for this chapter, chapter 16 of and into 17 of Numbers, is this bargaining. They rebel. Moses falls on his face. It's the first time he falls on his face 3 times in this passage. Like, I've fallen on my face 4 times. 3 times were in just basically begging God for guidance and blessing in a huge undertaking, right? 3 times in my life. 1 time was out of desperation. But here, in like 2 days, Moses falls on his face 3 times. This is a hard time. I mean, you can kind of read through this and kind of miss this, but this is a horrible, horrible time for them. And he gives instructions for the censors. The rebels congregate. They should know, but this is that madness, right? Remember the 2 sons of Aaron, Phinehas and Hophni, they came with strange fire, and everybody knows what happened to them. So now here they all congregate with their censers and their fire, right? This will work out. And then in Numbers 16:20 to 22, and the Lord spoke unto Moses and Aaron, saying, separate yourselves from among this congregation, that I may consume them in a moment. And Moses and Aaron fall on their faces, O God, the God of the spirits of all flesh, shall one man sin, and will I be wroth with all the congregation? Then the rebels die. All the rebels die either in the pit or in the fire. And then in verse 41, but on the morrow, all the congregation of the children of Israel murmured against Moses and against Aaron, saying, Ye have killed the people of the Lord. And then the Lord spoke unto Moses in 44 to 45, saying, Get you up from among this congregation, and I may consume them in a moment. They fell on their faces. That's 3 times they're falling on their faces. And then Moses sends Aaron out. He says, the plague has begun. And Moses runs out with a censer, and he stands between the living and the dead. And like 14,000 people die in this plague. So it's just a horrible, horrible time. Everyone's just wrecked over this. And this is still kind of in the bargaining. Only at this point, it's like probably the bargaining has reached an end here. People know, okay, Aaron is special. We're not sons of Aaron. Okay, we've kind of gone through this bargaining process, and we're accepting. And that's the depression. But before I get to that, the last thing was Moses says, everybody, all the tribes, bring a branch. I'm going to put it in the tabernacle. And one of those dead branches sprouts almonds. And almonds is shekadim, and it's cool. It's the same root as to be awake or to be alert or stand on guard. And shakad. And so Aaron and his descendants, and you don't hear any debate about this even today. This lesson was taught like 3,500 years ago, and really everybody understands that Aaron holds a special place, and this was all handled during this event. And so then they go into the 4th stage of grief, which is depression. We're all going to die, and they just accept it. So in Numbers 17, verses 12 to 13, and the children of Israel spoke unto Moses, saying, Behold, we die, we perish, we all perish. Whoever cometh anything near unto the tabernacle of the Lord shall die. Shall we be consumed with dying? And then the last stage of the grief process is, so we've had denial, anger, bitterness, depression, and then the last stage is acceptance. And they accept we're all going to die. And now, these guys that were stirring things up are gone, and now it's kind of like digging in for the next 38 years and just making the best of it, because we're all going to die. And anybody know what, according to Jewish tradition, was the sign of the end of the judgment, of this judgment, the thing that happened? It's kind of a cool thing. So last week, when the spies, refused to take the land, that was Tisha B'Av, the 9th of Av, the month of Av, right? Well, according to Jewish tradition, most people that were going to die that year would die on the 9th of Av. It's kind of like a memory of the rebellion. So people would sleep near a grave or that night, or dig a grave and sleep near it. They'd make it easier for everybody to bury them the next day. And this went on for 37 years, whatever. And then the 38th year, nobody died. And they thought, okay, well, we miscalculated the date. So they slept next to their graves the next night, and the next night, and the next night. And then Tu B'Av, 2 is how it's Tet Vav. It's how you spell 15. And 15 is the middle of the month. That's a full moon. So now they knew, we've actually passed the 9th of Av. We didn't miscalculate. We've passed the 9th of Av, and nobody died. And so Tu B'Av has become what's called the Jewish Valentine's Day. It's one of the happiest days of the year, and it comes from this tradition. So they knew that at the 38th year, the 40th year, 38 years of dying, that the death sentence is over and they're going to go into the land. Now there's some fun things a couple fun things, and I'll close with these fun things in the Torah portion. This is a pun, it's a pun, and it's just fun finding puns, and Hebrew's full of them. You don't see them in English. Numbers 18:2, and the Lord said to Aaron, and thy brethren also of the tribe of Levi, there's Levi, that's how you spell Levi, Levi here, but the root is lava, which means to join. The tribe of thy father bring thou with thee, that they may be joined unto thee. That they may be joined. Ve yi lavu. Ve yi lavu. So it's like Levi, which means to be joined, will be joined to you. It's interesting that, does anybody know why Levi got this special thing, or apparently what led to them getting this special thing? Because remember, they screwed up along, Levi and his brother, can't remember which brother it was, but they avenged Dinah, and they went into Shechem, killed everybody, and Jacob cursed them, right? He says, he cursed them for that. And then all of a sudden they have this special place. And so he said both of them, they're going to be scattered among the tribes. They're not going to have their own tribal land, right? Reuben, Shimon, right? Shimon and Levi are the ones that did it. And then, so Reuben, he screwed up. He did his screw up. Shimon and Levi, they screwed up at Shechem. And then, so the kingship goes to Judah, the fourth son. So why does Levi all of a sudden get this privileged position? Anybody know what they did?
Pincus?
Huh?
Was it Pincus?
Pincus, yeah. I mean, that was a good one. And he was of the tribe, grandson of Aaron. But so remember the golden calf, and Moses came down, and Moses, goes through the roof. And he says, who's with me? And the Levites said, we're with you. And he sent them to the camp, and they killed 3,000 people. So it's cool because they ended up being scattered, but they're also like the glue that holds the 12 tribes together, because every tribal property has these Levites that are all part of the same tribe. And so it's kind of like you have these 12 separate pieces, and you inject this glue in there, and it kind of holds them all together. So they have this special thing. And this is first used in Genesis 29:34, when Leah, remember, she's not loved, but she's having sons. And when she gives birth to Levi, she says, and she conceived again and bare a son, and said, now this time will my husband be joined. He will be joined is yi lave. He will be joined to me. And she gave him the name Levi. So that's the first time, she named all her sons based on what was happening. And so they picked up that pun again. It's not a really funny pun or anything. It's just fun to see it in the Hebrew. It's fun to see these connections and go, oh, that's a kick. But there is a fun pun. It's not really a pun, but it's a fun thing. And every time I read this Torah portion, I almost laugh. And that's this one right here. Kahuna. Okay, so that's in Numbers 18, verse 7. Therefore, thou and thy sons with thee shall keep your priest's office for everything of the altar and within the veil, and ye shall serve. I have given your priest's office unto you as a gift, service of gift, and the stranger that cometh nigh shall be put to death. So in the Hebrew, it's kahunatchem, which means your priesthood. That's the word. But if you were just to say it like priesthood, it's kahuna. Does that sound familiar, that word? Where have you heard that word before? Surfing?
Yeah.
Where does it come from? Hawaii. Okay, so when Israel was scattered by the Assyrians, they just went everywhere, right? Because that's what Assyria did, was scattered them. When Babylon conquered Judah, they exiled them to Babylon, and then Persia took over, and then Cyrus brought them back. But those first 10 tribes, right, 120 years earlier or whatever, well, there's the Silk Road to China, and there's the Cherokee Stone in the States, which might be one of the tribes, and there's all this there's indications of Jews having gone everywhere, 2,700 years ago, something like that. Yeah, and one of the indications is for example, in Japan, there's a guy who lived there for 35 years, and he said, there's all these signs that Jews went to Japan. For example, the Shinto temple, the priests carry their ark barefoot out into a river, and they stand there, and they don't know why they do it. In the Shinto temple, there's a painting of a shepherd with a sheep, and there's never been sheep in Japan, or at least until that time there had never been. And there's all these things, and it's a long paper he's showing all. PBS says there's 400 words in the Japanese language which can only be explained by Hebrew origin. And so I ran him by our coach's wife because she's Japanese. Like dabaru is chatting, and in Hebrew dabar is word, speech, daber. And there's a bunch of words like that, 400. Well, it's just a canoe ride from Japan to Hawaii. Yeah. And like this is the word, kahuna, right? Kahuna. The big guy, the kahuna. And that's a Hebrew word. And so like every time I read the Torah portion, I get that, I just kind of laugh. It says like 10 chapters later in Numbers 26 that the sons of Korach did not die, right? Because we have Psalms by the sons of Korach. So he died, but his sons didn't, and they wrote Psalms. So. Well, that's it. What do you want me to do now?
Wow.
Well, let's look into it for a second. Thank you.
Okay.